A trans police officer has been dismissed after calling free speech campaigner Harry Miller a woman beater and a Nazi. Over a period of 18 months, Lynsay Watson sent Miller, himself a former police officer, over 1,200 messages, abusing both him and his campaign group, Fair Cop. A police misconduct panel was told that Miller was the victim of this campaign because his views on gender identity were in direct contradiction to those of Watson. So here to discuss this case, I'm joined by Barrister Sarah Phillimore. Hello, Sarah. Now, you've had a run-in with this police officer yourself, right? It sounds incredible, the idea that a serving police officer would be sending abuse, given the amount of time that the police spend tweeting saying, don't abuse anyone online because that could be an offence.
No, well, the whole story is incredible. About 18 months ago, Harry wrote to the Chief Constable of Leicester Police saying, you've got a problem, a member of your force is behaving in this way.
Yes.
And he got the brush off from the Chief Constable, oh, not a problem. Harry did actually succeed in getting Lynsay Watson arrested. But they then let the offence time out. It had a 6-month time limit. But so then came the misconduct hearing. And the really astonishing thing for me that was revealed was the police admitted that they'd given Watson the advice to tweet anonymously, to carry on.
So they'd said that specifically. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Fair Cop, we should explain, Fair Cop is a group that stands up and says, no, the police should be impartial when it comes to ideological ideas, and they've clearly taken a side. And that's what offended Lynsay Watson, is that right?
I need to correct you, Andrew, because obviously, according to Lynsay Watson, what we are is an anti-trans hate group who he's reported to the anti-terrorism unit, I think, 60 times. And with impeccable timing, the day I was reading about his misconduct hearing and his dismissal, the Bar Standards Board sent me an email saying, do you like to know, we've just dismissed this complaint about you. So I thought, oh, how exciting. Clicked on it. It was from Lynsay Watson, referring to when I appeared on your show on the 11th of June. And
sorry about that. But...
well, yeah, notably you got off scot-free. But we were talking about the ideology, freedom of speech, and I said something like, I have a right not merely to criticise, but to mock and to be offensive about this ideology.
Yes.
Because it's both mockable and offensive. Now, Lynsay Watson wrote to my regulator to say that watching that made him nauseous and he shook for hours.
Watching my show?
Yes.
Well, at least it's a reaction, I suppose. But...
So either, Andrew, he was lying about that in an attempt to get me disbarred, or that really was his reaction. And remember, in June, when he did this, he was still a serving police officer.
Yes.
Now, imagine if you were a woman making a complaint that you were being harassed for your gender-critical views, and that's who gets sent to your door to investigate.
Well, that's what's so worrying. I mean, I don't know what's more worrying, actually, the idea that there's a serving police officer who has that reaction just to a TV show that they could easily just turn off and not watch, or the alternative, which is that they're just cynically using this to try and get you disbarred.
Yeah.
Either way, it's a terrible situation. But Lynsay Watson has been dismissed now, and that has gone through. Thank goodness for that. So hopefully that abuse will stop, I would assume. We'll hope so anyway. Now, I want to talk to you about another issue, Sarah, because this week there was also a court case which seems to have kicked self-ID out the back door. Is that right?
Yes, it's confirming the earlier judgment from the Scottish court about what was meant by sex in the Equality Act, saying that sex doesn't just mean biological sex, it means legal sex. So men with the GRC come under the heading of sex in the Equality Act. And I think there's a real link between this and the Lynsay Watson case, because what that's done is, OK, it's been quite clear and helpful that we know if you don't have a gender recognition certificate, you remain the sex that you were born. Now, that seems to have come to a shock to quite a lot of people. There's been a lot of obfuscation around that law. So I think that's actually really helpful. And I say, let's make the obstacle the way. Let's make it very clear that a GRC matters. So you're going to need to start carrying it and showing it on demand. Because my understanding of the law is if you have a GRC, then prima facie you're allowed in to female spaces unless it can be shown there's a reason to exclude you. If you don't have a GRC, prima facie you are excluded.
It's very tricky, this, because, of course, a GRC, effectively, it indulges in a kind of legal fiction. So for the purposes of the law, you're treated as the opposite sex. But, of course, it doesn't negate biological reality. It can never do that. And
this is why I say it's linked to Lynsay Watson, because it's really interesting. Going back to the Home Office report before the GRA was written, at the time there was, I think, 4,000 trans-identifying men and about 400 trans-identifying women. And it was very much a recognition that these are poor, unfortunate people. We must do our best to allow them to live their best lives, to feel comfortable as the people they want to be. No consideration whatsoever of the impact that that might have on women. And that's very telling. So I think what has happened is both the Equality Act and the Gender Recognition Act have been built on that foundation. Is our primary goal is to help these poor people who are suffering. Who wouldn't want to do that?
Right.
There's never any discussion of the impact on women. And what it's ended up doing, as the number of trans-identifying men increase, I think has empowered a group of men who, by definition, are mentally ill. And Lynsay Watson is a very good example of that. If you've got somebody narcissistic who feels entitled to compel everybody else to do as they say, you're going to end up with a Lynsay Watson. And when that person is in uniform, when that person is a police officer, that's terrifying.
But I have seen some gay and lesbian campaigners raise concerns about this judgment because they're saying that associations that are designed, say a lesbian association, that they will be forced by law to accept men into the association. Is that right, or have they got that wrong?
As I was saying, I reread the judgment on the train and I was quite happily struck by, at least we've got clarity now. No GRC, you're not coming in.
So sex does mean sex for the purposes of the Equality Act, yes?
Sex means both biological and legal sex. If you've got a GRC, you've got the legal sex of a woman, if you're claiming that as a man. But the really horrifying thing about the judgment, which I think a lot of people have picked up on, the Equality Commission gave an example of why this biological and legal sex was a mistake. And they gave a specific example of lesbian associations. Because what the court has ruled is, if you are a man with a GRC, you claim to be a legal lesbian. And you can come into this lesbian group fully intact, as we know 80 to 90% of trans-identifying men are, and you are suddenly a lesbian. And the court just didn't dismiss that argument from the statutory body, which is there to assist with understanding the Equality Act. It dismissed it in a really quite contemptuous way, saying it just couldn't understand the problem.
How can it not understand the problem? That seems quite straightforward
to me.
Well, we
come back to the earlier point I made. If all of this is built on the foundation that we're doing all of this for the poor, mostly men, the majority of men, who feel so upset with the sex they were born, there never has been a culture of thinking, well, hang on a minute, what about the women? What about the women who really, really don't want penises in their spaces, the lesbians?
Well, exactly. I mean, I can have sympathy with anyone who struggles in that way and feels they can't live their life unless they present differently. I have total sympathy for that. But the kind of person who would say, well, I'm going to remain an intact male and go along to a lesbian speed dating event, which is what happened to Jenny Watson recently, I have less sympathy for that.
I've no sympathy at all, and it's actually very frightening, because if that's a man like Lynsay Watson, I mean, I'm told that maybe the reason that the police were backing off so quickly was that this person has caused a lot of trouble, particularly for female officers that he had to work alongside. And so that is the problem for us women. When you're getting men who maintain their testicles, their penis, who've gone through male puberty, they are almost inevitably bigger and stronger than we are, and we don't want them in our spaces. And it's not just a matter of safety, it's a matter of dignity. And for lesbians, well, it's a matter of their entire existence, isn't it?
Yes.
How have we got to this stage where the only people who've been deemed worthy of consideration are men with a serious mental illness, and the impact of their desire to compel everyone else to go along with them is just not been thought about?
Yeah, very well put. Sarah Phillimore, thanks so much for joining me tonight. Really appreciate it.